There was a itty bitty lemon squeezy itchy gooey something other. That's the fact of life or the tone of death. Whatever writing in the episode. I do like watching Ricky September and listening to him too. Wait, hang on. What? Dot Bubble? Dot Bubble? That's Bubbles. What's going on? Why is this buffering? Oh God! Why are you buffering? Oh, this stupid thing! I hate you! I hate you so much! Ah! Yep, that happens when you say you hate the algorithm. Itty bitty lemon squeezy. Oh dear, I hope I don't end up like that guy. Um, let's get out of here. Yeah. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Nick here, and welcome to my review of Doctor Who Season 1 Bad Wolf / Series 14 / Season 40, Episode 5, Dot and Bubble. Fun fact, Russell T Davies had said that he had been asked to write for the Stephen Moffat era of the show, like how he's asked Moffat and Chris Chibnall to write for this series, which Moffat, of course, accepted that and wrote Boom. So, when Russell was asked for the Moffat era for about Series 6, I believe, maybe, he had the idea of a social media messaging story, like commentary on social media and its attitudes and impact on young people. And he decided not to submit the story because he thought it would be too expensive for the time on a, say, 2010-2011 budget. Fast forward to 2022 for writing, 22-23 for filming, and 24 for broadcast, and we have Dot and Bubble realised with the updated visual effects and a bit more money in to make it look more realistic. And yeah, the Dot and Bubble effects look really great. Some of the best effects of the series to date. This series is no shortage of really great visual effects that work in seamlessly with the episodes. By the way, I still got a bit of the cold I had when I did the 73 yards review, so apologies about that. I also like that it's mostly set within one location, that they don't have to go to studio so much. They can go and do on location, so they can kind of get that outside feeling with the visual effects and the Dot and Bubble in there. So that's really nice. So the plot of Dot and Bubble is that the Doctor and Ruby arrive at this place called Fine Time, which is a human colony world for rich kids aged between 17 and 27, who are mostly there just to have fun. They do a little bit of work to contribute to Fine Time's existence, but it's only for about 2 hours sitting at desks and putting their hands on something. And they complain about it. They complain about having to work for 2 hours putting their hands down and getting chapping or whatever that is. Trust me, guys. I recently got a new job at a shop, and I'm putting stock out in places, and I'm bringing out big cages and a couple of trolleys with lots of stock out there, and have to put it on the shelf. It actually gets quite tiring, and that's just in a shop. Don't even get me started on warehouses. A lot of people have a lot more manual jobs, so these guys actually have it easy compared to the rest of us. Yes. In all honesty, though, I think most of us would probably kill for the type of job they've got. Pay can't be that great, though. But then again, they're rich, so I guess that it's probably not much of a problem for them. Anyway, so the Doctor and Ruby can't actually get into the city because of the security, the high security of the place. However, something has gotten in. Some sort of woodlouse creatures, how the man-traps, as they're called, have gotten in, and they are eating the residents of Finetime in alphabetical order of surname, as we later discover. And it's up to the Doctor and Ruby to get in contact with somebody to get them to convince them to then get everybody else out and get themselves out of the city. And they end up contacting a young woman called Lindy Pepperbean, played by Callie Cook, who, I'm going to get out of the way, is absolutely fantastic in the role of somebody who you really don't actually want to be a main Doctor Who character. Like, this is the Chancellor Auton of the series, but Chancellor Auton is now the main character and also added that extra bit of dislikability. By the way, if you don't know who Chancellor Auton is, watch Monster Paladin. That's the only time I'm going to recommend watching Monster Paladin outside of a marathon or completion. Or if you're curious and you haven't seen every story yet. Anyway, so Lindy Pepperbean is one of the Finetime rich white young people who's obsessed with social media and has a very modern young person, high class society attitude, as we see throughout the episode. Callie Cook is absolutely fantastic at selling that character. She's really nice in the Unleashed behind the scenes as well, and all the best for her future, because she is an incredible actress as she pulls off playing Lindy Pepperbean as one of the most unlikable characters of the show, and possibly the most unlikable lead character. And yes, that's entirely intentional. And of course, your enjoyment of the story or how much you can watch is going to be mostly down to how much you can tolerate Lindy Pepperbean. But the fact that she is so unlikable, half that's down to the writing, of course, but the other half, and what elevates that writing and the direction, is the performance. The directing and the performance helps sell this awful character, but Callie sells it fantastically. And the direction by Dylan Williams Holmes, correct me if I'm wrong about that, who also directed 73 Yards, so the best director of the series, they do an incredible job of making the character come up as so unlikable, but not so much that you want her to die yet. Like you still want her to get out, even if you are like grinding your teeth watching her or feeling really uncomfortable. Anyway, so the Doctor and Ruby have to convince Lindy. It takes a bit of time, but eventually Lindy notices the man trapped and tries to get out of the city and warn her friends. Not all of them listen, of course. Even she needs a bit of convincing, but she does get a bit of help from someone who's sort of already noticed it. And that's someone who wasn't on their dot and bubble, which is these stand-in for like phones or something. Like it's a way to people can communicate with each other, a la Skype calls, Discord calls, etc. Like online social chatting, doing all their online stuff. But we've got someone who's actually out of the quote bubble for parts of the period of time actually doing reading, and that is song artist Ricky September, who goes on the bubble to post his songs and music videos, and then just sits inside reading when he's not working, I guess. So he then gets out to help Lindy, and she sort of develops, she has a crush on him, but she gets more of a crush on him and starstruck when she's with him, and they try to get out of the city together. Ricky September is, honest to God, the nicest character of the story outside of the Doctor and Ruby themselves. He is very far from an entitled twat, and once we get to the end of the episode, you sort of realise that he's possibly the only decent person in the city, perhaps the only good person. As a spoiler alert for the ending, these entitled rich kids, young rich kids, I suppose kids is putting it a bit young. It's more 17 to 27-year-olds, so young people, basically. These entitled rich young people with high-class society attitudes are also all of them are white. And the point of the story was also, as well as the classism and social media messaging and young people attitudes, it was also a warning against racism, because the entire episode has been designed as an intentional commentary on racism of how entitled young white rich people could be racist towards black people, of course, or POCs, persons of color, in the future. And it's mostly made apparent at the end of the episode, but you kind of do see the themes throughout the episode when you rewatch it. It is more apparent at the end, though. Apart from not having any other black person on screen besides the Doctor, it isn't entirely obvious until we get to the ending where they almost flat out say it. I would say heavily implied, but it's between heavily implied and flat out saying it. It's like almost flat out saying it, but so heavily implied that it can't be otherwise. So, yeah, these characters are basically racists. Apart from maybe Ricky September, because he didn't really have much of an uncomfortable attitude listening to the Doctor. I mean, when I saw it the second time, I thought maybe, but then he was like, "Oh, actually, yeah, I do know about what you're talking about." So it was more of the fact that he kind of already knew what the Doctor was talking about, rather than the fact he was black. So honestly, I think Ricky September might even not even be that much racist, or at least compared to the ones we see in the end of the episode, including Lindy herself. It's possible Ricky could if he had, spoiler alert, if he had survived this episode, he might even have accepted the Doctor's offer. He might have been the only one. He'd be like, well, Fine Time kind of screwed us over, so keeping the standards of Fine Time when Fine Time chose to let us die is kind of a bit of a backwards thinking, guys. It's probably better if we do go with the Doctor. But because Ricky is such a decent person, they had to kill him off. In probably what seals Lindy's fate as the most unlikable character of the episode, even before the racism reveal. There could even still have been a bit of redemption if it wasn't for that, but naturally, there is no redemption for this character. Because she leaves Ricky to die as well, because when it's her turn to be killed, she then reveals that Ricky had changed his name after hitting a couple 5,000 followers, and that his real name was his surname began with a C rather than an S. So she leaves Ricky to die. The one good person in the story besides the Doctor and Ruby, and he's dotted, so to speak. More on that later, actually. I do have a point to come back to with the way he is killed and the way that it tries to kill Lindy. So yeah, absolute evil bitch. Well, I mean, not evil, but I mean, not very far off. I mean, in that scene, she pretty much is a villain. She lets Ricky September die, even without the racism. That sealed her as a horribly unlikable character. That's the most unlikable character of the series, and we have to follow her as a lead. Again, testament to the performance and the directing as well as the writing for making us feel that way. If it had the racism and not the murder, the quote murder, she'd still probably say all to her fate, but at least he wouldn't be a semi-killer. But yeah, these two together sort of seal her fate. So the fact that when the residents who do survive the attacks leave Fine Time for the wilderness with a low chance of survival on the outside, and they reject the Doctor's offer to come with him because he's black, etc. Well, the audience is pretty satisfied knowing that, well, if they're gonna die, fine, their choice. Let them die, I guess. I don't really have a huge much more to say about the story other than that, because we do see the processes of Lindy's story going through from waking up that morning to the escape. We're following her pretty much all the way through. I don't think the story ever leaves her side, because everyone on the screens are, well, they're on the screens, obviously, and then at the end, she's in the same sort of dock area for the end, so everyone's down there. I think the only time it shifts focus away from her is at the very end when it shifts to the Doctor following the racism remarks towards him, his reaction, and then just watching them leave and heading off himself, as well as any time we cut to Ricky, but he's usually in the same place as Lindy, so not really much of a diversion from Lindy there, or really at the end, but it focuses more on the Doctor at the very end rather than Lindy, but it doesn't divert too far away from her. There's still a few shots of her on the boat looking back as the story wraps up. On the level of performances, this is equally Ncuti Gatwa's best performance so far, considering this is apparently this might have been his first scene filmed after The Giggle, depending when they did the screen filming with everybody. Everybody was on the screens filming their bits for the bubble, and also his bits for the previous episode, 73 Yards, on the cliff tops in Wales. So besides those bits, maybe, unless they came after, production-wise, this is apparently his first scene filmed as the 15th Doctor after The Giggle. And like with how Millie Gibson was basically thrown in the deep end with her first story, filmed-wise, the first scene for the 15th Doctor, the first proper scene for the 15th Doctor post The Giggle, production-wise, is him receiving a massive turn down by the residents of Fine Time surviving this, who turn his offer to save them down because, and they almost flat out say it, they are racist and they don't want to go with a black person. They don't want him to save them. I mean, they are grateful that he saved them and had screen-to-screen contact, but they don't want to go with him physically, and that him just being there sort of is contaminating they're almost contaminating them just even being there. So Ncuti has an amazing performance as he's doing the reaction of shock to what he's hearing. This is the first time a Doctor has to experience hearing this, as the Doctor's always been white up to this point, not including Joe Martin's Doctor and Timeless Children incarnations, and only counting the official canon Doctors in the TV series. So sorry, Lenny Henry. And I think that's actually it. There might be a few other spoof parody Doctors and of course the fan films. But besides Lenny Henry in a comedy skit, or well, two if you count last year's one as well, and Joe Martin's Doctor in some of the Timeless Children incarnations, that's actually it. Huh. There's actually less than I thought. I thought there'd be more for the comedy sketches. So as the first mainline incarnation to be black and the first one to actually experience this, again, not sure about the Fugitive Doctor. Maybe Big Finish will tackle it. I've got her comic, I need to read it. I'm not sure if it's tackled there, but I'm not expecting it to be. Anyway, so as the first Doctor who actually has to listen to all this, similar to how Jodie Whittaker's Doctor was the first one who had to be accused of being a witch, as seen in The Witchfinders, accused of witchcraft because she was a woman with a magic wand. Honestly, I actually thought the racism would come in one of the historical episodes, like Devil's Core, dealing with it in the 60s, 60s Britain. If it was America, and like Rosa was in the 50s, that would definitely be the case. But 60s Britain, not so much. And then Rogue, of course, being Regency, but it's not really touched upon too much then, but I guess because Britain had more of a black community, even back in the Regency period. And as the story is trying to say, it's there is still racism in the future. There will still be racism, sadly. And there's still racism now, and it will still be in the future, especially with this pocket of young, entitled, high-class people in a white community. So, all white, so not even young black people from our upper class society. They're all white people. So the Doctor has to receive this news in a really hard way, and Ncuti's reactions from shock to trying to process it, to trying to still be able to save them like he usually tries to do, and is very in character with this Doctor's incarnation. And then once he's turned down again, he tries one more attempt at effort, but he's ignored. So he laughs it off. He's still trying to process it. He laughs it off, and then once it's all gone through and he's had the initial laugh response, he lets it rip. It's like the shouting and the near crying of the reaction and the frustration of being ignored because of his race. It's not just the racism; it's the fact that they chose not to go with him and would rather risk death outside than go and live somewhere else, but him taking them goes against the Fine Time standards. So he's more emotionally upset about that rather than the actual racism and the fact he's failed to save people who chose not to be saved because of the, quote, fine type standards, and would prefer to practically ride off into death elsewhere. What a powerful ending. And his last couple, the tears, seeing the emotion of him is being sad for them because of their rejection, and also sort of sad for them going off to the wilderness to die. He knows they're going to die, but they refuse to be saved by him any further than getting them down to that dock by the screen, so there's nothing else he could do. Which, in the case of the audience, and maybe even Ruby, probably are thinking, well, fine, if that's how you want to be, go and die, you bastards. But the Doctor, being the Doctor, isn't like, or at least being the 15th Doctor, at least, still kind of is sad about that. There is still the hint that maybe Lindy could be still thankful for him in those shots, but it also could be taken as her being defiant to the end of not going with him and standing by her decision to go with the others. And the Doctor's like, well, fine, I'm off. We've got to go to Regency England next, and then we've got to solve this Susan Twist character mystery. FYI, Susan Twist cameo in this one is possibly her second biggest outside of the finale, and that is as Lindy Pepperbean's mother. And the Doctor and Ruby notice this, and the Doctor mentions the ambulance. Ruby says she's seen her somewhere else, which could be a reference to the hiker, but it could also be the woman at the pub on Church and Ruby Road, or the one, or they could recognise her from Devil's Quarters, the tea lady, or even on the screen as Space Babies, but probably mostly the hiker, because that was the one just before this. And the next episode, it's Ruby's going to notice the painting. Might touch upon that next time. I also mentioned Tom Rhys-Harris. No, not Farries. Tom Harris. Tom Rhys-Harris. Tom Harris is a YouTuber and a based bestie. I got him a Subway once 25 months ago. He still owes me £6.49 for it. But we're besties, so it's okay. Go watch his YouTube channel, it's great. Anyway, Tom Rhys-Harris, not played by the based Tom Harris, but still played perfectly by the equally talented Tom Rhys-Harris, is brilliant. I really like Ricky September. As I mentioned, he might be the only decent person in this story besides the Doctor and Ruby, and he's definitely the most likable and pretty bit of fun. He's the only guy who uses his brain. He's the only guy who doesn't react negatively to the Doctor from being black or an outsider, or Ruby for being an outsider. I actually thought the story was more of a allegory for people being on the outside, and a friend at my new work said that he thought it was an allegory for classism, but it turned out to be racism. Although there's probably a bit of outsider and classism in there as well, but mostly the racism as well as the social media commentary. But he's the guy who actually reads the room as opposed to plays on his phone all day. Whereas actually a copy of a book called The Room. Maybe it's a novelization of that Tommy Wiseau movie that's so bad. But yeah, Ricky's great. I really like Ricky. It's such a shame he's killed by the Dot, which comes actually to a point I mentioned I was going to come back to. So the creatures, the man-traps, are supposedly, they're theorized by the Doctor to have been created by the algorithm to eat everybody, because they work out it's going to be in alphabetical order of surname. So the Doctor realizes, if that's the case, these can't be creatures from the outside. They must be created by the AI, and the creatures have also eaten everybody on the home world as well. So they must have done that first, and then they came here, or done it quicker, and then they come to find time to finish the job. So they're eating everybody for some reason, killing everybody. It's apparently because the AI is fed up of hearing everybody on their bubbles talking and doing their things. Maybe the AI's developed anti-racism, anti-classism, anti-annoying young people sentiment, and has decided, fuck this, I'm going to kill you. Well, I suppose anti-other racist, classist people for the homeworld, but for these guys and the young people, maybe. Definitely the entitlement and the other bits. But yeah, it's developed that, and it's like decided to create these man-trap creatures, sort of like germs, and they're eating the infection, which is the people, but in alphabetical order of surname. So they're doing that, and that kind of makes sense. It gives us a monster of the week, and it gives us a threat for people to avoid, or to watch people being eaten by, and people to avoid being eaten by because it's not their turn yet. And yeah, they prove to be a pretty effective villain, even if there isn't really much going to them. They're sort of like they are the bugs that have been created to clean up the infection. But then, when we get to the scene when Ricky and Lindy are escaping and the Doctor and Ruby are working everything out, and then the Doctor's like, oh, but what if the AI was the one that created these things to kill people? What if it's fed up of you? Don't trust the Dot. And then the AI actually picks up on this. It's like red warning lights. Ricky did say that he had tried to warn people about this, but his videos kept being deleted. So that also sort of ties in with that. But then once the AI knows that it's been ousted, it then decides to just fly around and try and kill Lindy that way. And then eventually Ricky, when she reveals his secret, ultimately effectively sort of being responsible for his death. So I do have the question, and I have heard others mention this. What was the point of the man traps if the Dots can just do that? Was the man traps plan A, and if they couldn't reach the targets and or the AI got discovered, it went to plan B, which was to fly around hovering? It's one of those plan Bs where it sounds like this should have been plan A, and plan B is to introduce. Okay, that didn't work. Let's introduce these creature things. This is the Johnny English villain way of thinking, where you have an overly complicated idea for plan A, but once part of that's been ousted, you're like, okay, let's go to plan B, which is something you could have done straight from the beginning. So it's sort of like it's the Johnny English villain uh, method of thinking, because plan D actually sounds better than plan A. Maybe that's why it was plan B. I guess plan C is also if they get to the forest, the algorithm's like, well, they're going to die out there anyway. That's plan C. But yeah, it does beg the question, why is the Dot flying around killing people if they've got the man crabs? Or why do they have a man traps? Or why do they have the man traps if they can have the Dot flying around buzzing? It's a quick, easy death. Unless they want it to be slow and painful. Again, that could be the other thing. But I don't know. Maybe it was plan A, and then plan B was the better option, so they decided, let's put that for plan B in case plan A doesn't work. Wrapping up the cast, I think everybody does a really good job playing their respective characters across the board in the story. Similar to Millie Gibson as Ruby, who doesn't get as much to do, which I'm surprised about, because Millie was more free round this period to be in the story more, but I guess if the Doctor can get into fine time, she couldn't either. So the story had to focus on somebody else, Lindy in this case, being the first character, I think, since Sally Sparrow in Blink that we followed a non-Doctor or companion, a non-main character as the temporary main. Like, we have guest companions in stories like The Doctor with the Wither and the Wardrobe, Voyage of the Damned. Donna was one before she came back as main, full-time main. So I guess characters like Sally, Lindy, Elton Pope, and Mark Horey for Mission to the Unknown, they're guest main characters who would usually be like a supporting character otherwise, or a guest character, but they promoted to main character status for that story. Lindsay is nowhere near as likable as those other three, by the way. Mark Horey, Elton Pope, and Sally Sparrow, they are leagues more likable than Lindy Pepperbean. But it is interesting to see the life of a nasty person through the Doctor Who lens, and it makes that ending more powerful and more fitting, even if it's a bit more bittersweet. So on the whole, Dot and Bubble, it mostly comes down to how you can tolerate watching this main character, Lindy, how comfortable you are with it, and the social media commentary, and later the racism commentary, the classism entitlement, and rich kids commentary, the etc. But yeah, it's sort of a good mixture of social media, upper class young people socialism comment or socialite commentary with a bit of racism as a warning of that racism still exists and will still exist, as well as also providing a monster of the week story in this sci-fi setting that sort of still feels fairly normal and relatable to a present-day viewing, and also an interesting take on the Doctor Light and Companion Light story. But it's not perfect because, like I said, the story, the enjoyment of the story is how much you can tolerate Lindy, the society, and how comfortable you are watching it. It's more comfortable on rewatches, like Rosa was, like 73 yards and boom, for me. So it's a bit easier to view, but it's the first time I can understand the stomach, not turning, but like gritting, like the stomach and teeth gritting aspects, but it's easier on rewatches. I shall be passing this episode at a well-deserved 8 out of 10. So yeah, this is mostly from personal aspects. If I was going objective, it could have gone to a 9, but I don't feel fully comfortable with giving it a 9 because of the feelings and the aspects. So I'm going to give it a high 8 instead. Meaning that this episode, it goes above Boom and Space Babies for me, but it's under Devil's Cord, 73 Yards, and Church on Ruby Road. If I was counting the 60th specials, I think I would put it above the Star Beast objectively, but that one's one I'd rather watch. And then the other two are, of course, above it. So yeah, I think this is a bit of a tricky one, but it's not a bad one, and it's designed to be uncomfortable. So I can't fault it for that. It's just a matter of personal taste as well. Hence why it was almost a 9. But again, it was personal preference, so I went with high 8 instead of a low 9. As opposed to 73 yards, which even the problems and the nitpicks of that, I think it succeeded more where it was intended. So I think that one earned its 9 there, even if it was a more lower 9. Same with Church on Ruby Road for being an absolute blast of fun. The giggle as well to a lesser extent, but that one has a few more holes in it as well. So, thank you for watching my review of Dot and Bubble, and I'll see you next time for what could possibly be my favourite episode of the season, Rogue. Goodbye.